So hit the recording, and now officially we can start. So as for every meeting, if everybody that's new for the group wants to introduce, state their interest in the group and in the area, this is a perfect time to do so. So
I can go ahead, Dejan.
Hey.
Hey,
I
guys.
don't consider you a new folk, but definitely appreciated your presence.
Yeah, I have not attended very often, so for the rest of the folks on the call, my name is Jaromir. I have been at Red Hat for over 7 years now, so part of the Red Hat company, and I am a product manager for edge computing at Red Hat. So my main interest is to learn what kind of use cases you guys are seeing, what kind of needs you have from Kubernetes, and try to contribute also from our perspective.
That's great. Welcome, Jarda. Hopefully we'll have you more here.
I hope so. I hope that now I'll be more free, and it will make me more contribute here.
Cool. Anybody else?
Hi guys.
Hey.
Hi. My name is Tinashe Wubro Chipomo. I'm a postgraduate student at the University of Cape Town. I'm working towards building edge computing IoT analytics platforms using cloud native technologies. Hence, joining you guys to hear your expertise and what you think is the best way to implement such initiatives. So yeah, that's basically me.
Yeah, welcome. Okay, so
we've had some dynamic agenda adding, which is great.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. That's good. So Matt, do you want to go first with the update on the glossary?
Yeah, sure. That's great. For background, when we publish, so let me tell you about the State of the Edge first. So the State of the Edge is a group that I co-founded that is sponsored by vendors, but it's vendor neutral. And its mission is to publish vendor neutral research on edge computing. And we published our first report last year in June. It was the State of the Edge 2018. Mid-August, we're going to publish our 2019 version. There will be two substantial upgrades to the previous State of the Edge report. One of them is we're doing a pretty extensive forecast model. We've hired some analyst experts to build a forecast model, which I think the industry will really appreciate because there's about 30 of them that you can overpay for $5,000 and they're all complete bullshit. So we're going to try to do a real one and give it away for free under a Creative Commons license. But we're also doing a section that we're calling Postcards from the Edge, and we're inviting third parties to contribute point of view essays, similar to what Chris Anchek did last year, representing the CNCF. So starting there, I would like to invite this working group to contribute an essay. The way it would work is, we should agree on a point of view, and we have some guidelines for how it's written, but neither of those should be any trouble. And we need like a 250-word abstract that'll actually be published in the PDF of the State of the Edge, and then a 1,000-word, approximately, doesn't have to be that, more or less, essay that'll be part of the supplemental online material and will be promoted separately as well. So if the working group has a topic that they're passionate about, that they'd like to get out in front of there, that represents a point of view coming out of this group, I'm happy to help shepherd that through that process. It's completely optional, but I think it would be good to express this group's viewpoint and also promote this group's work. So that's the State of the Edge. And I would need to get that essay sometime before the end of July, ideally. The second thing is the appendix. We built an appendix in the State of the Edge last year called the Open Glossary of Edge Computing. And our goal was to gather empirically and sift through all the different definitions in and around Edge and come up with some opinions and points of view and canonicalization and disambiguation and all of that. And obviously something like that is always a work in progress. And so what we did is we took it out of the State of the Edge organization and we contributed to the Linux Foundation. It's now an open source project. All the definitions sit in a GitHub repo. People do pull requests all the time. And it's one of the founding projects of LF Edge. This year, this month actually, we're going to rev it to v2.0. And August 4th is when we're tentatively going to pull the switch on that. And we are working with the governing board of LF Edge to push this sort of canonicalization across all of the LF Edge projects. And we're using a variety of different mechanisms to do that. Most of them following sort of the principles of open source, trying to encourage people to do it based on knowledge and meritocracy. But we may in fact make that a qualification for projects to reach a certain stage, is to demonstrate conformance to the lexicon. And of course, if people disagree, that's the whole point of an open source project. There's a mechanism by which you can do it. So with that background, I welcome contributions from this group to the glossary. If there's anything that you'd like to try to get in there, again, I'm happy to help shepherd those issues or pull requests. And I would like to encourage this group to consider adopting it as appropriate, as you write white papers and stuff. And again, it would be a two-way street. So if there's terms or phrases that you feel need to be defined differently or need to be defined at all, we're happy to incorporate that, and vice versa. We're happy to give feedback on the language that you use. But I'd love to see, certainly within the Linux Foundation family, everybody's talking about Edge, talking about in the same way, using the same terms, because when we don't, it just creates chaos. And it lets sort of vendors and pundits dominate the language, and I think slows down the industry's progress. Let's see if there's anything else I was going to add to that. Yeah, I think that's essentially it. I just want to share the plans on that and what we're doing over at LF Edge, and invite that essay and the contributions to the glossary if you have appetite for that.
Yeah, that's great. I think the only issue is, can you find resources to do it in time? But let's try to organize.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be part of the 2.0. I mean, I saw. I haven't been to these.
It's an open call for a contribution.
Yeah. But we can. I mean, I think just starting the dialogue, and I think what would be ideal if there's somebody in this group, whether on this call or just in the group larger, that's willing to be a champion for the coordination. That's probably the best first step, because then, as this group goes to look to publish a white paper, I can help channel resources, review the white paper, and identify anything that we think, maybe the glossary should benefit from or contribute to. And also just a way to conduit, create a relationship between the different organizations that I'm a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense.
Maybe that security white paper is the one that should be reviewed in the context of the glossary.
What was that? I didn't hear that.
So what Dejan was talking about at the start of the call was the kind of complete draft of a security white paper.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, because it probably will introduce some new terms and phrases that we'd like to get into the glossary. And I bet there's some introductory material that we want to try to make conform to the canonical definitions, or at least have a discussion about.
Yeah. And also for the point of view essay, I think we can certainly come up with something based on a couple of sessions we did for the working group. How the different basically reference architectures for Edge with Kubernetes could look like. So I think.
Yeah, that's all appropriate. Or if you wanted to excerpt from the security white paper, if you think the timing is going to work, I certainly would be happy to link to it and use that as help you use that as a promotion mechanism.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, let's take it from here and continue, communicating. I think we can add more people to this discussion that are not on the call today, and try to work out.
Okay.
What
Super.
can we do? Short term, long term? Yeah.
Yep. Perfect.
Great.
So I put in, I'm happy to, it looks like we have time. If people are interested, can quickly walk through this solution I published on running kind of a bridge in Kubernetes. I'll go ahead and share my screen here.
Yeah, that'd be great. I took a look at it, but never found time to put any comments into that. So this is great.
Yeah. Let me know if this is sharing now.
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah. So a couple points around it, right? One is that I think in the Kubernetes ecosystem, the general value of like a broker in general is not that appreciated for sort of service to service communication. I don't think it's nothing new for people who know brokers, but for some reason, I think the ecosystem just seems to be more around kind of, Istio style service to service type communication. But once you are running an MQTT broker of any kind in a cluster, you have this great opportunity on the edge to talk between devices locally, between applications within the cluster, between applications and local devices, right? It's just running completely sort of offline, just as a LAN-based broker is a useful thing unto itself. What I wanted to do was then take the Mosquitto broker and use the feature it has for bridging, so that essentially a subset of the namespace routes to our cloud IoT service. And the syntax for this is not super well documented. So it took me quite a bit of trial and error to kind of come up with the right syntax. So the idea is that these local broker namespaces, which I prefix all of them with GCP, route to our device-specific topics on our managed cloud service. So that way, anything that isn't posted on the local broker to anything one of these topics is just a pure local MQTT topic. If you post to this, it gets relayed to this cloud topic. And you set up the bridge communication by setting up the host. Now, one of the things that is particular to kind of the Kubernetes and our cloud service kind of intersection here is that our password used remotely is something that needs to rotate. And so you have, where's the remote password? Yeah, so remote password is this variable. So what this is actually a template file. And then what I have done is in this, I'm running a deployment. I'm sorry, my computer is acting quite slow. This deployment actually deploys two containers. One is just the standard Mosquitto container. So totally unmodified, not custom, as pulled from kind of Docker Hub. But the other is my custom refresher. And then they share a volume where the Mosquitto configuration is. And the other kind of interesting thing I figured out how to do in here, this is just kind of Kubernetes, deep tech of Kubernetes for fun and profit here. But in here, I also set up the capabilities to allow the shared process namespace so that I can SIG-hup the Mosquitto process from my refresher container after rewriting the configuration. So it's a good example of kind of using Kubernetes specific features to take a unmodified Eclipse container and then, still get my custom behavior out of it. The other thing this shows for those who are learning more about how to use customize, it uses customize to take some of the project specific overlays and patch that into the standard deployment YAML, as well as generate the config map with the device private key. So that's an overlay for those who haven't used customize. It works on kind of base layers and then modification. So with those namespaces mapped, you can route telemetry, and you can also have, one of the really nice things is that our cloud service has a limitation that a device can only open a single connection to the service. So it can only open one MQTT connection for a given device. And that means that if you want to actually have other local devices or even different applications in Kubernetes all interested in subscribing to a certain event from the cloud, they can't create independent MQTT connections and independent subscriptions, whereas they can make independent local subscriptions to the broker. And because it's bridged, when this single kind of say command event arrives, you can have multiple kind of listeners or subscribers locally. So it acts as a nice kind of decoupling fan out point, which you can't do. We don't allow for sort of security and control and scale reasons, like multiple connections as the same device. So that's another kind of a feature addressed there. I'll stop here before stopping sharing just to see if there's any questions that would be worth me having either of these tabs open to go ahead and quickly show you, but if there's no questions of that nature, I can stop sharing. Any questions?
I'm just wondering, is there any benefit of using the broker there, or you just need the bridge and the thing is that you're using the Mosquito broker is that it just has that functionality, but right?
I'd say the advantage of having the non-bridge topics is that you can use it for just pure local
communication, yeah.
Communication, even pod to pod, right? Because the other nice thing is you can expose that broker using cluster local DNS. So all these local clients need to do, let me see if I have that as a quick example. The host name in Kubernetes is just MQTT bridge, right?
Yeah.
So your MQTT clients in these applications can just use a nice simple to refer to host name because it's a Kubernetes service. So that's like, I think there's some utility that I'm calling out, which is that even if you don't bridge this, just having a broker in Kubernetes is not a thing that you see a lot of.
Yeah.
I think just because the tendency is to go with services as the pattern. The thing that I'm going to then build next on kind of top of this is to use this broker as a Knative event source. So then one of these applications, instead of using a native MQTT client, it can use, the Knative eventing construct to subscribe to a certain, subscription type for MQTT. That's sort of it's a whole lot of machinery to basically, create one message type to another message type, but I think that way it'll let people who are totally unfamiliar with MQTT, who are coming at it from a Knative, perspective, saying, okay, well, here's a device, a motion sensor. As an IoT device, it's very comfortable posting an MQTT message that motion was sensed. How do I write an HTTP style Knative service that can be invoked when that happens? So that's the next stage.
Yeah. To me, it makes sense. I mean, on our side, we have some similar efforts based on the things that we already presented here. Basically doing the similar kind of thing. But yeah, maybe I hope for the next meeting we can give more presentation on that front as well. But yeah, I think it's.
You guys, I mean, I know Red Hat's doing a fair amount with Knative. Are you specifically doing this with Knative and MQP or?
Well, I wasn't thinking about the Knative, but yeah, definitely there's a group of people working on all kind of bridging. But what I meant is more like these direct proxies for different kind of traffics for HTTP or MQTT overlay MQP network and bridging the services between the clusters and things like that. So similar thing that we already presented here in a concept stage. So, trying to make that more consumable.
Right. So for example, I have a container that's running an HTTP server on port 8080, and I want to get an HTTP request when a message lands on a certain broker topic.
Yeah, but don't think about the broker topic. You can think about the general AMQP addressing, which can be
sure
that directly services or whatever. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe there's a way to do something in common, because I think it's targeting basically the similar use case.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I'm leaning towards Knative, right? Because Knative is trying to standardize the cloud events and it's harder than it should be to create an event source.
Okay, I didn't try it myself, but yeah, I believe you.
Yeah. What else? We have a kind of open mic time if anyone has projects that they're working on that they'd like to kind of give a ad hoc update on. Relatively quiet group.
Yeah.
I know you're all doing stuff, so. But maybe share in a future meeting if you get things to a milestone. Anyone have any questions that they have around the use of Kubernetes or use of Kubernetes on the edge that they are seeking kind of an answer of or sort of guidance around a best practice of anything?
I had a quick question. Does this group, or is it in another group, discuss much about the multi-cluster, like Kubernetes Federation V2 work?
I think it comes up here. I definitely think that the flavor of multi-cluster that I call many small clusters versus a few large clusters, right? I mean, I think a lot of typical multi-cluster Kubernetes interested parties come to multi-cluster from the context of I'm running 5 globally distributed large clusters and I need to do a global rollout of software across my 3 to 5 big clusters. Whereas, Edge IoT, like we often talk about the Chick-fil-A case, they've got 2,000 tiny clusters. And so the challenges around multi-cluster are tuned or tweaked, but largely common. So we don't in the working group try to usurp any of the multi-cluster SIGs sort of charter, but we're looking at and interested in if people have thoughts around kind of where does this need to be different for Edge, or where does Edge add additional kind of consideration? And for me, it's around that scaling and that number that you're having potentially many more clusters than you would in a typical cloud multi-cluster context.
Is the Kubernetes Federation stuff, like which use case is it targeted more for? Is that targeted more for the few large clusters or the many small clusters?
I think the fewer large clusters. In general, I mean, you're going to find that most of the Kubernetes ecosystem is looking at running Kubernetes in non-edge environments. So I think a lot of the fundamental communication patterns, like once you are pushing something to more than one cluster, right? As soon as you're at 2 clusters and you're multi-cluster, some of the systems they'll just work. But anything that has you know, especially I think some of the UIs are kind of problematic. If you have this idea that you have 5 clusters, you can kind of fit everything in a certain dashboard view of saying, okay, my 5 clusters are all healthy, they're all, you know, in these states. But if you have 2,000, you're not going to just fit that in a nice, simple, you know, fat list view.
And from my perspective, I would be interested, since you're asking, you probably have a use case when you need a federation for remote edge locations. And if we are talking about these hundreds and thousands of locations, what kind of federation would you be expecting there?
Yeah, I don't have details of any kind of specific use case. I think it's kind of like I actually work in the Openstack Sterling X group, and it's a kind of integration type project within OpenStack, and Sterling X is targeted, it positions itself as targeted for the edge. But one feature within it is kind of a distributed cloud type feature for OpenStack, which is like at a very high level analogous to the Kubernetes Federation. But so far the customers we also have a commercial product that's based on OpenStack Sterling X, and the customers that are like evaluating it, it ranges. Like there's some that are looking for just a small handful of kind of edge clouds, and then there's some that are talking like thousands. And
right.
The final thing about kind of what I'm working on is the OpenStack Sterling X kind of project has gone through a bit of a change in the last kind of 6 months or so, that we now run a containerized OpenStack solution. So kind of at our core, at our platform level, we're running Kubernetes clusters now. So we're starting to look at, like with the OpenStack Sterling X distributed cloud feature, we did a lot of kind of orchestration capabilities kind of on our own, but now that we're running Kubernetes now at potentially, you know, many clouds, we wanted to kind of leverage kind of the orchestration stuff that's been done in the Kubernetes Federation group.
Right. Yeah, I'm coming from the OpenStack background as well, so fairly familiar with those kind of use cases. But overall, what we've seen, at least from my perspective, when we get to these remote edge locations and talking about federation to that, those remote points of presence are fairly independent. So they are really standalone clusters, like Chick-fil-A example. Those clusters are completely standalone. What you need is you need unified management and ideally automated GitOps model when you're managing those environments. But as for federation and some service chaining or something between those locations, it's not really requested, at least in this large scale amount of use cases. Maybe in some, when we are talking, as Preston mentioned, larger data centers and a smaller amount of clusters, there might need to be some federation. But as for the larger sizes, I don't think it is that necessary, or at least I have not seen too many requirements for that.
Yeah, actually, that's consistent with what we've seen, is that the use cases that we've seen yeah, first, the edge clouds are fairly independent, and independent even in the sense that, you know, if they get network isolated from the central cloud, they need to be able to continue providing full service. So they are like fully independent standalone clouds, and yeah, the orchestration that we've done has been more around, you know, kind of infrastructure orchestration, like, you know, getting identity orchestration, you know, for user ID and logins common across them, managing, you know, in OpenStack, managing glance images across them all, you know, managing things like Nova flavors and, you know, key pairs and security groups, and it's kind of common configuration aspects that typically someone, if they're managing, you know, doing some high level management across all the subclouds, kind of typical kind of configuration things that he'd want to manage globally across them all. So yeah,
I think you called out two that are really good. One is identity, and the other kind of policy, and like policy via configuration. So having those centralized. But I think that centralization of some core systems is different than federation.
Correct. I would expand on that. This usually is being solved by layering the configuration templates so that you have some global configuration, and then in another layer you're specifying for a specific region, and then you have another layer of configuration which is specific to a location which you need. So that is very often done by layering the configuration files.
The other interesting pattern, and I lost some of the work on a laptop that I spilled coffee on, but I'll go back and recreate some of it, is the Kubernetes supports OIDC as a source of authorization and identity for clusters. So you can set all of your clusters to recognize the same issuer. So the demo I built was using, we have sort of an identity platform that can delegate to, you know, Twitter, GitHub, Google, Facebook, etc. So using GitHub, I was able to kind of take GitHub and GitHub Teams, inject that into the OIDC token, and then use that in Kubernetes API server configuration so that only members of certain GitHub teams could interact with the APIs for certain namespaces on the cluster. And you can set that up. Once you set that up once, you can unify all of the many clusters to trust that same IDP as the issuer of tokens. So Kubernetes has some built-in help there.
Hey, can I ask what kind of OIDC, I don't know what the proper term is, but connector you were using for that? Like, I've been kind of playing around with Dex. Is that one of the more popular ones, or?
Yeah, that's certainly one of them. So we have a managed service that goes under both Firebase Auth, and now we have it called a Cloud Identity Platform on Google. But it's the same backend. It started as Firebase Auth, and it was built to allow people to build, mobile applications to make it really easy to log in with X, Y, or Z. But then it becomes its own issuer. So for like GitHub, you know, they support OAuth, and that's used as a way of establishing the identity in this identity platform. So you can just log in with GitHub, and then you have a identity in the system. Another observation on the multi-cluster side, I'm seeing, you know, Chick-fil-A does this where we have a couple projects where I think the name now goes under Anthos config management, but the idea of using sort of GitOps for declarative policy across multiple clusters. So let me see, was it Jaromir?
It's Jaromir, yeah.
Jaromir, okay, so you pronounce the J. So Jaromir was saying like this idea of layers, right? So that you would have, you know, one or multiple Git repos that each contribute to those layers, and then each cluster would have a task in a privileged namespace that pulls those configurations down and then applies them, or runs certain controllers that apply them. And that seems to be a pretty good pattern for applying that kind of global multi-cluster policy.
Especially in large numbers. So if you have thousands of clusters to manage, this is almost a must.
Yeah. The other thing I'm seeing is that in general, people are looking at a namespace as a global namespace for authorization, meaning if you define a namespace, you define it on all of your clusters and it represents a certain kind of role, workload, et cetera. Right? So if it's an edge cluster, that namespace might be running workloads that are communicating with equipment that is, mission critical or sensitive at every installation where that edge is installed. But that you wouldn't end up, you want to avoid a pattern of coming up with sort of edge location prefixed namespaces, just because then you just deal with a proliferation and management that makes it harder to use that kind of global config.
This is a very good point, Preston.
Yeah, I guess having the single namespace makes it easier to deploy workloads on all nodes that supports it, right?
Yeah, you just define you need I don't know, high computing specific class or something like that. So really be very specific on what kind of workloads you need, but don't be specific to this is the location I need it to, unless you really need to target that specific location for some reason.
Our final call on the open mic. We could let our European friends check out for the day. And do you want to second this?
Yeah, I think that should be it. I think, yeah, we had a good attendance, despite I wasn't expecting this much people. I said it at the beginning, at the middle of the July, but it's good that interest is here. So yeah, let's keep on in touch on the Slack around all the topics that everybody is interested in, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much, Fox. Was useful.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.